Everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm Maddy Martin, Head of Growth and Education for Smith.ai. We are a 24/7 virtual receptionist service handling calls, chats, texts, and Facebook messages for small businesses, many of whom are solo and small firm attorneys. So today, as part of our master's series, I'm really excited to have Gavin. Gavin and his colleague Paul were originally going to present together. Paul came down with sort of a stomach bug. So we've got Gavin here who's in tip-top shape, and he is going to tell us about better banking for attorneys, IOLTA compliance and beyond. We're going to discuss the 3 biggest mistakes that you can make with your IOLTA. We'll hear from Gavin the best practices to prevent mismanagement of client funds, and then how to get the most out of your bank and why banking relationships really matter. So without further ado, Gavin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you can jump into your presentation?
Yeah, of course. And so good to be here, Maddy. Thanks for helping organize this. As mentioned, my name is Gavin Musynske. I am the head of sales at Nota, which I'd like for everyone to think of it as a startup that's within M&T Bank, fully funded. You know, my paycheck says M&T. I've been with M&T for 10 plus years in the small business lending space operations, and then for the last 2.5 years, doing nothing but working with solo and small law firms. And we're working on building a digital bank specifically for that population of solo attorneys, and really excited to share some of our learnings from, without exaggeration, hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations with solo and small firm lawyers all over the country. So thanks for having me, and really excited to share some of the stuff we've learned. So Maddy, if it's good, you want me to just share my screen and jump right into it?
Absolutely, let's get into it.
Awesome. Can you give me a thumbs up, Maddy? Can you see my screen here? Awesome. So really the 2 themes we're going to be touching on, it's surviving and thriving, right? So surviving, simplifying your IOLTA process. We all know that's one of the biggest reasons attorneys could get in trouble is by mismanaging that IOLTA. So sharing some of those learnings. And then as Maddy mentioned, you know, how can you make your bank work for you? We know banking is generally commoditized. It seems like it's a one size fit all, but it doesn't have to be. And we've heard some really good best practices, and we can give you some insider tips, again, based on our interactions that we've had. So jumping right in, as Maddy mentioned, I am not Paul. Paul looked like a zombie, but I'm glad I look a little bit better than he did today. But as I mentioned, I'm the head of sales at Nota. And you know, hopefully next time Paul will be here so he can introduce himself as well. But again, jumping right in and talking about how you can simplify your IOLTA. I always like to start with a cautionary tale. And it's amazing, if you put on a Google alert or you search the web, there's no shortage of stories about attorneys getting in trouble, right? It's the naughty list. There's a lot of different ways attorneys can be disciplined. And every time you look, there's always something that's IOLTA related with mismanaging client funds. So I've got a story that I always like to share. This one is kind of outlandish, but it involves a Florida attorney. And this attorney actually hired someone to help oversee his IOLTA. He's a busy guy, and time is money. So we brought in someone to take care of this IOLTA. But the problem, one of many, but the big problem is that the person who was brought in was previously convicted of embezzlement and wire fraud, and did 41 months in prison and sentenced to 5 years probation. So that's a no-no, right? So we all know not to do that. Some people might say, well, it's a mistake. Maybe you missed it in the background check. The attorney actually knew. So what's great about this story is that the attorney was aware and actually signed documentation acknowledging his acceptance of that risk, bringing on someone with that type of background, knowing that it was a high-risk hire. So surprise, surprise, 5 months later, this individual that was running the IOLTA was caught forging a $21,000 check. So again, that's bad news, but we didn't fire him. We're not going to fire the person. Instead, we're going to make this individual, this new employee, the head of our real estate division, and give them full access to overseeing the entire IOLTA. So again, red flags all over the place. Fast forward even beyond that. So over a 4-year period, this individual with the prior criminal background, with the convictions and the felony record there, basically stole over $4.7 million of client funds. No brainer. What did we think happened to the attorney? The attorney was disciplined and can no longer practice, right? Disbarred, can no longer practice law. And when I tell that story, there's always smiles when I'm in person and we're doing it, because it's almost like from a Hollywood movie. But most of us would never put someone like that in charge of our IOLTA. Seems like it's a stupid mistake, easily avoidable. But the big lesson here is that you can be disciplined based on someone else's behaviors, because ultimately with the IOLTA, you are responsible. You're the fiduciary, you're the attorney. So even though you might not put a convicted felon in charge of that account, your bookkeeper can make mistakes, your grandmother can make mistakes, your spouse can make mistakes, another attorney can make mistakes, but ultimately you can be held responsible. So even though we won't make that mistake, hopefully, for those of us on the line, the big lesson learned is that to survive as a lawyer, you can't make those mistakes with the IOLTA. So that's one very big mistake you can make, but really there's general themes that we've heard. And again, in our hundreds of conversations, we talk to not only clients, we talk to attorneys all over the country, all different practice areas, all different sizes, but really with a focus on solo and small firms. And the reason why we focused on this segment is because these are the attorneys that are wearing multiple hats, right? So you don't have a dedicated accounting division. You don't have a CFO that's doing this for you. Most of the solo attorneys and even 1 to 3 person law firms we deal with, it's an attorney that's managing the IOLTA, right? Or it's a convicted felon in Florida. But most times it's an attorney. And we heard that there's a lot of different mistakes they can make, and we wanted to just call out some of the 3 biggest ones that were most common with this segment. So number one, and this word, if you are new to dealing with attorneys or a new attorney, this is probably ethics 101, commingling. It's the big no-no. It's the big word that we all hear about. You cannot mix business and personal funds with your client's funds. And this is all outlined directly in the ABA Rule 115 around safekeeping property, client-lawyer relationship. And even though it's heavy legalese and lots of language there's really 4 big takeaways. Number one, client funds should always be kept in a separate account, and that account needs to be maintained in a state where your law office operates. So if you have 2 offices, one in New York and one in New Jersey, you probably need to have 2 IOLTAs, one for the New Jersey relationships and one for the New York relationships. A lawyer's own funds, they are actually allowed to be kept in trust. We've heard attorneys say, hey, I want to keep everything separate. Technically, you are allowed to have some funds in the IOLTA account, but the sole purpose for those funds is actually for paying bank service charges or fees that may be incurred. You can have a little bit of a cushion there. We can talk more about that later, but that's the sole purpose for when you can have your personal funds in that account. If you're doing prepaid legal fees or you're managing expenses and tracking maybe through retainer agreements with the IOLTA, you can only withdraw once those fees are earned or once the expenses are incurred. You don't want to be pulling money out ahead of time. You want to do it with a good paper trail once you perform the work. That way you've got coverage there. And lastly, if you're receiving funds into the IOLTA account and they're due to the client, you should promptly notify your client and deliver those funds in a timely fashion. And again, no surprise, our little call out at the bottom here, mismanaging client funds, commingling, making any mistakes that not doing these 4 things here could lead to suspension, and in extreme cases, disbarment. So big no-no, big mistake. Let's make sure that we're not commingling client funds. Now this one, if commingling is the no-brainer, where you're sitting there saying, yeah, of course, everyone knows that. This is the mistake that was more common than we would hope, and it's around poor record keeping. So bar associations and the ABA, they require pretty robust paper trails in the event of an audit, or if you've ever been in front of the grievance committee or the grievance commission, like you probably experienced this firsthand. There's some questions here, and you should be able to answer yes to every single one of these questions. So great, if we're not commingling funds, we're checking that box. That's awesome. But can you prove that every IOLTA transaction is related to a specific matter? Can you prove that every balance down to the penny can be tied to a client matter? And most attorneys say like, yeah, the 2 answers we typically get is yes, of course, I can get it down to the penny, or I can get close. There's some money in there it's old, it's from years ago. I hope I don't get a phone call. But it's important, right? The requirements are you should be able to account down to the penny by client who you're holding out the funds for. If you're making, certainly you are making deposits or withdrawals, you should have documentation of the date, the source, and the purpose of that money movement. Client ledgers. So it's one thing to be able to track down to the penny by client, but any money movement in or out, we will explain what matter it's related to, and again, the transaction details for that client. Bank statements, records of deposit, all that stuff we see very, very often. That's usually pretty good because you can also call your bank, and most banks can get that to you in a very quick manner. But the bottom two there, reconciliations of the client trust accounts and records for the past 5 years. So you need to be reconciling not just the trust account, but the client ledger. And you should be having records for this account as far as 5 years. And in New York State, I believe it's 7 years. So if you ever get audited, if there's ever any questions, you need to be able to provide not only yes answers to all of these questions, but 5 to 7 years worth of data showing that you're buttoned up, because they may go back several years or several months to justify that. And again, these are not requirements that we're making up. This isn't supposed to be fear mongering, but this is pulled directly from the ABA model rules on trust account records. So if nothing else, I can tell you this is one of the biggest mistakes that we see. Please be mindful of how you're keeping records, how you're tracking this stuff, because if you are ever audited, which I don't wish on anybody, you should be able to answer yes to all these questions. The third big mistake that we've heard, and this is kind of one of these terms that we hear like, yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I don't really get it. Three-way reconciliation. I'm sure we've all heard about it. We know what three-way reconciliation is. We've heard it. But if I said, write it down on a piece of paper, can you tell me what the three components are and how that works? Most attorneys wouldn't want to take that pop quiz. It's actually not hard. This is a pretty easy thing you can take away from this. There's three components. You've got your IOLTA bank balance. And again, that's pulled directly from the IOLTA account. But keep in mind, that's just showing you a snapshot. That's showing you a month of activity, but it's not showing you any pending transactions. So it's only showing stuff that's hit the account, that's cleared the account. Number two, you've got your client ledger balance. So every incoming and outgoing transaction corresponding to a specific client matter. It's important that you don't just have the overall account, but you're balancing by client matter. And number three, that third component is the trust accounting balance. This is your accounting book, right? So if you're using QuickBooks, if you're using it, it's a third-party accountant that's helping you. The trust accounting ledger, that book balance, the difference between that and the bank balance, that typically includes pending transactions. So if you're writing checks and you know they're in float, your bank isn't going to realize that until it hits the bank account and you get that alert as a line item. Your accounting book should show you what's in flight. That way you can balance number one with number two and number three. And again, as a refresher, a reminder for best practices, on the right here, the safekeeping property requirements, they like to see monthly reconciliation of client ledgers and at least quarterly reconciliation of the trust account. So hopefully, if nothing else, three-way reconciliation is not as confusing after seeing this slide, because again, it's pretty straightforward. It's not that hard, but it's something that we should be mindful of as practicing attorneys. So we talked about the three mistakes, and there's more. There's a lot more. There's a lot of ways you can slip up, but those are three of the biggest, most common ones that we've seen. But don't worry, we've heard plenty of best practices, and this is not just me saying, here's what you should be doing. We've talked to attorneys, and they've said, yeah, I'm buttoned up. I've got a process. Here's how I do it, and I can sleep at night. So some of the best practices that I want to share with you, starting with being active. And of course, we're not going to put, again, a convicted felon in front of managing our IOLTA. But you should really be paying attention diligently, because again, your license is at stake. So paying attention to every single transaction and flagging or raising questions if something doesn't make sense, like a $21,000 fraudulent check, and regularly self-audit. Double check what you're keeping track of and what's hitting the bank, and make sure everything is balanced. Number two, and this ties directly to our Florida example, make sure that you're limiting access to the IOLTA, right? Banks only allow an attorney to be the signer on the IOLTA. You can't have a bookkeeper or another admin be a signer on the account. So with that in mind, be mindful of who you're giving access to. We've heard attorneys that are saying, yeah, I'm the signer, but I give my login info to my paralegal, or I give my office manager my login and he or she helps me stay organized. We're not here to slap you on the wrist and say you should or should not be doing that. Just be mindful of who has the account, because if nothing else, we know that you are ultimately responsible as the practicing attorney. And if somebody does something improper, whether that's a bookkeeper, a paralegal, or another attorney, you can face consequences. So be mindful of who you're giving access to. And lastly, this is a best practice that might sound painful, but don't wait until the end of the month. I can't tell you how many times we've heard from attorneys, yeah, normally it takes me 15 minutes, it's not a problem. But yeah, February, it took me 6 hours. I couldn't figure out what this check was. It was outstanding. I had to work on a Saturday and a Sunday. That can be solved by not waiting until the end of the month. You don't need to reconcile every single day. Time is money. You guys are very busy and it's all about billable hours. But maybe don't wait until the end of the month. Maybe do it weekly. Maybe if you have a lull in the middle of the week, you're eyeballing it and just making sure everything is balanced. Doing that little bit of work in the middle of the week will save you the headaches at the end of the month. And again, most of the attorneys that we've talked to that say, nope, I'm good, I've got it down, I feel great. They're not waiting until the end of the month and then opening up their books. They're doing it throughout the month and they're staying on top of it. This directly addresses the big watch out that we've heard, right? Keeping detailed records. So we showed you that slide with all those questions that you should be able to answer yes to. So along those lines, keep records that can help you answer yes to those questions, right? So not only justifying the balances, but justify the activity. Being able to say right now, do a self-audit. Say, can I look at my IOLTA today and say down to the penny who I'm holding on to client funds for? Can I say for every single transaction, anytime deposit, withdrawal, money in, money out, I can explain the purpose, I can explain the client, and understand what it's related to. And a best practice that we've seen, do it all electronic. I know we love paper. The attorney industry, I've never seen so many checks written with any other industry. I've worked with construction, manufacturing, you name it, but it's pretty antiquated and everyone likes their paper trail, and I get it. Keep detailed records, leverage electronic tools that can help you simplify this, because if you're doing it with a physical ledger and only a physical ledger, you might be in trouble if you spill coffee on that, or if there's a fire or a flood. People don't think about bad things that could happen when they've got it handwritten. The best practice, and I can't emphasize this enough, no matter how you're doing it, do it electronically. That way you've got it, it's in the cloud, it's on a hard drive somewhere, and you can do this in a more streamlined fashion. So this one might seem like a no-brainer, but you'd be amazed how many attorneys are not doing this, specifically the solo attorneys. Mid-sized firms, yeah, they've got solid teams around them, but a lot of solo firms are saying, yeah, I just deal with whoever can help me. Across the board, you need to surround yourself with experts. So leverage partners beyond your bank that understand the legal space and the importance specifically around the IOLTA. So number one of the top reasons you can get disciplined and get in trouble. So again, regardless of what that bank is, I would love for it to be Gavin and Nota and M&T, but if you're happy with your bank, that's great. Make sure they have experience with IOLTA. When you're setting up the account, it's got to be titled correctly. You got to make sure it's opened. We've actually talked to attorneys, no lie, that thought they had an IOLTA, but they didn't. They had just a regular checking account and they were calling it an IOLTA. Just because you call it an IOLTA does not make it an IOLTA. Make sure that it's been set up correctly, it's coded correctly, it's titled correctly to make sure you're complying with the state. A best practice, even though you're allowed to keep some slush funds in the account for fees, don't have any fees hit the IOLTA account. With a lot of banks, it's a click of a button behind the scenes. You can structure it so any fees are coming from your operating account. So even if it's new checks or wire transfer, whatever those fees are, set it up so it's not being deducted from your IOLTA. Get that pulled directly from your operating account, just to remove that risk of you possibly going negative or having an issue with client funds.
Gavin, can I ask you a quick question? So,
Sure.
for anyone who, may be too shy to ask, and I would understand that, on your second bullet specifically, if you have named a bank account, an IOLTA account, and you're doing a lot of things right, but this isn't quite set up correctly, how do you self-audit that? How do you, what questions do you ask specifically of your bank or banker? How would you go into figuring that out and making sure that now that you have some sense of ownership, you know that it's being set up correctly? What are some validation points along the way there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this is where it helps working with a banker that knows what they're doing. So all the IOLTAs have to be registered with the state. So number one, I would check to make sure that the financial institution you're using is able to offer IOLTAs. Because you might walk into somewhere and say, yep, I opened up an IOLTA. But if you go to the state website and that's not an approved financial institution, well, you know it can't be an IOLTA. Number two, I would just ask what their process is. I can't speak about every single bank. With my personal experience, behind the scenes, not to get too technical, there's different sub-product codes. So you have a deposit account that's coded as an ABC, another one that's coded as a XYZ. We can provide documentation like, here's the title, here's the code, explaining how this is different from your operating account. Your operating account is an ABC. Your IOLTA, it's titled differently and it's coded as an XYZ. And another good telltale is if there's interest being earned, they should be able to show you. Some banks put it on the statements, some don't. But if it's earning interest and you're not seeing that swept out going to the state, you know there's a red flag. So if you're earning interest, you know it's not an IOLTA, because with IOLTAs, all the interest earned is going to the state to fund charitable, public defenders, legal services for indigent population. So there's documentation you can get. Yeah.
Okay, great.
For
so
sure.
Those are some questions you could ask directly today if you have any question around, is it actually an IOLTA that you have?
1,000%. And I also feel like I'm a bit, thanks for jumping in, Maddy. I'm trying not to be too much of a talking head. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Maddy, if they're too shy and you want to interrupt me, interrupt me. But I am going to leave some time at the end for Q&A because we'd love to actually talk to people instead of just talking myself. But thank you for jumping in with that. So we talked a little bit about the banking side. These last two bullets are beyond banking though, right? If you're dealing with a bookkeeper, if you're dealing with a CPA, make sure they have experience dealing with attorneys, right? The best attorneys that we've talked to that say, yep, I'm good, they've got a partner that has expertise in this field. They're not dealing with a bookkeeper that's got the ice cream shop and the pet store and the occasional law firm. They're dealing with someone that understands the nuances and importance of the IOLTA, as well as if they're assisting with through a reconciliation, they're able to provide guidance there. So we covered surviving. And again, if nothing else, be careful with the IOLTA. That's one of the top reasons people could get in trouble. But really, there's ways you can thrive as well. And people might be rolling their eyes, but make your bank work for you. It's amazing, when we talk to attorneys, and again, this is not just our clients, but attorneys in general. One of the big questions we ask is, hey, what are your pain points? Like, what's your bank doing that's great? What are they doing that's horrible? And some of the stuff that we've heard, we'll share out here. But really, for everything that the bank is doing that's horrible, banks in general as an industry, there's some insider tips that we can share with you to help you hopefully circumnavigate that as you're thinking about just leveraging a solid financial institution as a partner. And before we kind of jump into specific examples, I always like to set the stage, right? So when you ask people to describe their banking experience, it's probably somewhere in the middle, right? You've got the DMV, which is come in, take a number, grab a seat. Maybe I'll get to you today, maybe not, sorry. Or you've got Apple, which is sleek, which is cool. They're coming to you. It's concierge. They're hand holding you. I don't think banks are all DMVs. I think banks, I certainly wouldn't put us in that level. But I also feel confident that a bank typically is not giving you the same experience as the Apple store. So I want you to think as you're interacting is how can we shift our bank from the left side of this to the right side, right? What are things that we can expect and we can demand to get better service from our bank? Outside of that visual, we talked to attorneys and there's interesting words that came up in those conversations, right? What do you think of when you think of a bank? Suits, fees, stodgy, it's commodity, paper heavy, siloed, right? All these buzzwords, none of these are great, right? And it's very rare. It does happen, but it's very rare. We'll talk to someone that's, oh, bank, I love it. My bank is amazing. It is outstanding. You hear that about Apple. You got people that'll never go off the iPhone because they love the Apple experience. But how come we don't expect the same type of service from banks? So what we're trying to do with Nota and through this whole process of talking to attorneys is trying to make this shift, right? How do we shift from the DMV to the Apple experience? And how do we make these words terms of the past? So a question you need to ask yourself, how are you banking today? Are you just given a 1-800 number? Are you treated like anyone else? Is your banker unsure of how your firm operates? Do they understand the nuances of contingency versus retainer? Do you even have a banker? You would be amazed how many attorneys we talk to. I'm too small for a banker. I just work with whoever will help me. It's incredible. Is your bank slow to respond? If you have a question, are you able to get a hold of someone to get an answer quickly? And are your fees outrageous? This is an industry problem across the board, right? We've heard this, right? Like, and there's been regulations and things have happened, but a lot of times people complain about banks because the fees are high. If you're answering yes to these questions, you're probably doing it wrong. And you can't solve all these. There's no silver bullet to make all this go away, but there's things you can do to make your experience as a solo, as a small firm attorney better. And the reason why is because banks love attorneys. So even if you're sitting here and you're the solo attorney, or you're the person that just started your firm and you've got nothing going for you, you're just getting ramped up, maybe you just got your PC formed, banks love you. And don't forget that. And the reason why banks love you is because, number one, look at who else they're dealing with. Across the board, industry agnostic, attorneys are highly profitable. Overall, you're a higher margin business. You keep large deposit balances, especially in the IOLTA, right? If you're, for example, a real estate attorney, you've probably got several $100,000 or several $1 million flowing in or out if you're doing transactional real estate. Personal injury attorneys, you've got big settlements that are coming in. You're carrying much larger balances than a retail shop on the corner, right? Or a mom and pop. So be aware of that. You are highly profitable to banks, even if you're a solo. Number two, and this can't be understated, you are community leaders. So banks always think about, who would we want to partner with? If someone's going to make the headlines or do something wrong, do we bank that person? Is that someone that's our client? That risk isn't as high with attorneys. Yes, we've got the occasional story like the Florida one I led with where attorneys make mistakes. We're not all angels. But overall, you're visible leaders in the community and you're an excellent referral source because you have clients and all of your clients have bank accounts, whether it's business, personal, mortgage, whatever it is, there's good opportunities to partner there. So banks love that you're involved in the community and you're seen as leaders. And number three, banks are all about risk. Every single bank is about risk. They've got their credit division, they've got their risk officers. Attorneys are low risk. You're relatively recession proof. And that's not to say that COVID hasn't impacted us and the economic downturns of years past. I know that impacts everybody. But you don't see a lot of law firms shutting down their brick and mortar locations and putting up out of business. They're doing virtual, they're doing this, right? You're much lower risk, you have low overhead cost. Nowadays, all you need is a laptop and a law degree, and you can start your own firm. We deal with a lot of virtual attorneys. And if there is lending, there's a pretty low default rate because it's pretty stable, pretty reliable. So across the board, banks really enjoy attorneys, even if you're a solo. So with all that being said, are you feeling the love from your bank? Right? And I know it's kind of cheesy to say, are you just treated as another number? But looking at all the stuff I just mentioned, are you treated better than the pet shop on the corner or the struggling retailer? You should be, because you bring a lot to the table and you add a lot of value and stability to banks. So despite this, and honestly, it's information asymmetry. Attorneys don't realize the value they add. So now that we know the value you add, let's think about the stuff that we've heard and how we can address that. And I can't tell you how many times we'll talk to an attorney, and they don't have to even be in our target market. It can be across the country, no opportunity to win the relationship, but just having a conversation. Oh, well, I'm too small. I'm just a one-man shop. I'm too small for a dedicated banker. Why? Based on everything we just said, you should be able to have a dedicated banker. And here's a tip, truly, don't be another number. You should demand a personal banker. And you might say, how can I do that? It's not hard. Wherever your local branch is, who's my point of contact? I would like a point of contact. Can I have your card? Can I have your cell phone? Do you have a personal extension? You want to have an advocate on the inside. You might not need one, but if there's ever a crisis, like, for example, the PPP, I'm sure it helped a lot of people who had a banker they can call when there was a PPP need and they said, hey, I need assistance. And people that just called the generic 1-800 number and were put in the queue with everyone else. So if you don't have an advocate on the inside, Number one, first thing to do tomorrow or this afternoon, go to your local bank, call your local bank, try to get a dedicated point of contact, get their information, and see if you can get them as an advocate on the inside. The 1-800 number is important, and I'm not dismissing 1-800 numbers. There is a time and there's a place. That should never be your first option. You should always have a human being that knows who you are that can help you if there's ever a crisis. And hopefully you don't have one, but if you do, you want a person that can actually help. Second thing that we've heard, if you are lucky and you say, you know what, I'm doing it right, I have a banker, but I'm not really sure my banker understands how my firm operates. Yeah, he's a nice guy. Gavin's nice, but I don't know if he gets the law. He'll answer my emails, but I don't know if he understands my business. Insider tip: interview your banker, just like you would for a nanny or for any other job. Interview him. It shouldn't be a commodity. It shouldn't be just the first person that comes in and helps you. We're not at a furniture store. Interview your banker. Make sure that they have experience working with attorneys, and they should be able to provide you with references. You can easily ask questions about how they understand the business, but ask them flat out, do you have other attorney clients? If I wanted to call someone and get some feedback, do you have any names for me? Most bankers, if they have other attorney clients, they can give you references and it won't be a problem. But when in doubt, don't take my word for it, right? Ask other attorneys. Obviously, I'm going to be biased and I'm going to be passionate about what we're building and the organization I'm affiliated with. If you have a bad banking experience and you think your banker is not great, talk to your attorneys that you know through your bar associate BNI, through your CLEs. Who do you bank with? Who's your banker? What's his or her name? Can you do an introduction? I have some questions. When in doubt, attorneys stick together. You guys are a tribe. You share information, you share best practices, you share your mistakes. I would definitely leverage that connectivity to see if you do have any questions here that you're getting in front of someone that knows what they're talking about. And this is one that's improving, but is still there, right? So we've heard, hey, yeah, my bank has digital tools, where it's 2021, I would hope so at this point, but they don't really meet my needs. Easy tip to think about, but honestly, in practice, it's not that hard. Research and negotiate. So ask questions to understand what are the capabilities and limitations and how they might impact you as an attorney. Because again, you're not just another number. Every single bank has their standards, but there's exceptions. We're talking to them, they say, oh, great, you offer mobile check deposit with my phone? Nowadays, every single bank does that. But if I have a $1,500 monthly limit, does that help me? That might help another business that's doing one check every 6 months, but that's probably not helping the real estate attorney. So figure out what those limits are, figure out the pricing, figure out how it would fit into your workflow, and negotiate. You can negotiate absolutely anything, and you should be able to request exceptions based on bank standards. And a lot of times banks are willing to do this as long as you can provide documentation. So if you're going to a bank and saying, hey, I want an increased limit, or I want this type of pricing based on my volume, well, you've got bank statements, you've got data that you can show them and say, look, it's all right here. My average check deposit is 100,000. Our monthly limit is $1 million. I think, right? So for data that you have, and having those conversations to see if the bank can adjust their out-of-the-box services to be custom for your needs. Because a lot of times it's just a couple clicks of the button behind the scenes on the programming side with the bank, the bank tech people, just to give you the different thing or the different structure. This one we hear a lot, and I'm sure there's groaning, and I can tell you, oh, I'm getting an alert that my internet connection is being tough. Okay. Bank fees. It's a problem across the board. We hear it a lot. I have been guilty of this. I've faced the firing squad myself. At the end of the day, the best advice I give everybody, and this is, I would tell my family this: negotiate everything. Everything is negotiable, and attorneys are good negotiators. So now that you know, even as a solo attorney, what your value is to the bank, don't take everything for granted. Don't just assume the out-of-the-box structure or the out-of-the-box pricing is applicable for you. And I am not exaggerating. Nothing is off the table. The bank might say no. They reserve the right, and I've said no plenty of times. Most of the banks are evaluating their risk appetite based on, again, the industry, which we know is attorneys. But on the pricing side, they look at the profitability of the overall relationship. So if you can build a solid relationship with your bank and show them, here's the value that you're contributing, here's what you bring to the table, I would hope that there's a reciprocation and that I have different pricing than what you proposed. That's a natural discussion to have. If it's a transactional relationship and you're saying, hey, I've got over here, I want to use this one piece and I want you to be the low cost provider, banks might say no, and you can be okay walking away from that. But at the end of the day, if nothing else, don't take pricing for granted and negotiate. And as attorneys, we should be good at doing that.
So I have a question there, Gavin. Sorry, just to go back for one slide. If I'm sort of like a new solo or small firm attorney, I'm not, but if I were, what sort of bank fees am I most apt to negotiate successfully? Are there some wins that are sort of more easy to go after than others, would you say? Like some that are less reasonable?
Yeah, so I mean, some stuff should be a given, right? If you need like, hey, I don't want to pay for the initial check, but like, hey, I need to order checks for my firm. I just formed a firm, I need checks. Can you throw that in complimentary? I can't tell you how many people their blood boils when they get the monthly maintenance fees. And a lot of banks have it so that, hey, as long as you keep $2,500 or $5,000, you're going to avoid it. But that fee's $20 a month. If you can justify based on your relationship that I don't even want to even think about that, most banks are not going to lose your relationship over less than $200 annually. Right, if we're talking $10 a month, 200, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think monthly maintenance fees you should be negotiating, ancillary services like ordering checks, and do your homework, right? So honestly, my job as a banker is much easier if someone comes to me and says, hey, I would love to work with you, but you're charging $20 for wires, and I'm getting it for $14 at a different bank. A lot of times it's just give me the data, give your banker the data, and they can either, if they can meet the price, they will. If they can beat the price, they will. And if not, they'll say, sorry, we can't touch it. But you should be doing that type of work beforehand so there's no surprises. Because a lot of the stuff, again, it's just a matter of looking at the relationship and seeing what makes sense.
Right. So have multiple conversations, ask if you can match it or basically move on.
Exactly. And no, at the end of the day, too, some people are okay. Most attorneys like to negotiate. So this is I'm preaching to the choir. But again, they think of the value of the relationship. Think of what you're getting out of your bank. If it's commoditized and you're looking for the low cost provider, then yeah, just shop around, say, here's what I want, who can give it to me? Some people are willing to pay for certain services, right? And not everything should be free, right? Because no bank is going to give you the world for free. But just think about what your relationship is, what you're bringing to the table for the bank, knowing your worth. Discussion. And if there's something that's an actual, hey, this is a red line thing that I am not happy about and I'm leaving if you don't fix it, for the bank, it's going to be very easy. We'll either fix it and retain you, or if they don't value you based on the analysis they'll do behind the scenes, they'll be honest. They'll say, no, sorry, we can't meet it. Best of luck. But you need to ask.
Yep.
And if you don't ask, no bank is going to proactively reach out to you and say, we think we can save you money.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like one of the most important things is just, thinking back to earlier in the presentation, you need to make sure first and foremost that your banker, that the bank as a whole empowers their bankers to really understand attorneys' needs specifically. And then the negotiation is like maybe the next or beyond that most important thing, right? Like the most important thing is that you have someone who is even worth your breath talking to, negotiating with, et cetera. That's secondary. The number one thing is to make sure that you have someone in your corner who's looking out for you. That's worth a lot more than the $20 or $6 like wire transfer difference in the fees. Like, who cares about $6 if like your banker's not taking care of you? That's something that you can negotiate, maybe if not in the beginning, after year one, and you say, look, I've been with you, I brought in 3 more clients, my friends are banking with you now. Can we just bring these fees down a little bit? I'm really using this service often and it's adding up. That'll pay for your Calendly, who knows, right?
I love that you said that. So the one thing I'll add, I love that you use the word empower. And I think it's really important that, when we talked about having an advocate on the inside, you need to make sure that advocate is empowered. Because if you have someone and their response is always going to be, let me ask the supervisor,
Right.
oh, let me escalate it. That's not worth your time.
You
Time is
have a
money.
buffer.
But if you can talk to someone that says, Maddy, I'll take care of it. I'll email you by the end of the day. That's who you want to be dealing with.
Yep, I agree.
So another thing we heard from attorneys, specifically around working capital, and it's unique with attorneys because attorneys typically don't have robust borrowing needs, right? You might maybe get a mortgage if you own your building. Maybe really there's no like equipment, there's no need for like heavy loans. Maybe you're doing renovations. But the biggest thing we hear from attorneys is working capital, right? It can be ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys. Having that working capital cushion could help you during the slow months, or God forbid, when something like COVID happens, you've got a little bit of a cushion there. A lot of attorneys don't understand the process or know what they qualify for. And the advice that we give is really aim high and negotiate. So make sure there's a common theme, by the way. Negotiate. If you take nothing else away, negotiate is the magic word of the day. Most attorneys, when they're looking for lines of credit, right, to help with working capital. The questions you want to ask, and again, making sure you're talking to someone who's educated, who knows the process. How is a line of credit calculated? How much would I qualify for? Here's a spoiler alert, and this is different with every single bank. Someone stopped me in the street and said, hey, what would you typically offer? 10 to 20% of revenues is a ballpark. You can go higher, you can go lower. But as a starting point, if you're doing $1 million in revenues, maybe you're asking for $100,000 to $200,000 in a line of credit. Banks are going to do their analysis, they'll do the underwriting process. But as a starting point, you don't want to ask for $1 million line of credit. You want to position yourself maybe a little bit above that, but in that range. You also want to understand before you go through the process, because the process, depending on how your bank does it, can be painful. Understand the requirements, right? What are the credit score requirements? Is there a personal guarantee? How long does the process take? You should be speaking with someone that's not just taking an application and shifting it into a black box, but can actually articulate and walk you through the process. A lot of banks are different, but they do typically have credit score minimums where, hey, if you're below 600, it's almost an automatic decline, right? You want to get that personal credit score up because that's a factor, even though it's a business loan. I can tell you really the sweet spot, I would ask people, and again, there's different situations, but mid sixes is probably solid. You certainly don't want to have like a bankruptcy or anything on your credit report, but you want to ask about your unique bank and stuff. Every bank is different, but a lot of banks, especially with these small loans, they will require a personal guarantee. That being said, I can tell you nothing is off the table. So maybe you can negotiate. If the bank has a solid relationship with you and they know that you're a longtime customer with solid balances, that's something that might be standard for everybody else. But perhaps you can get an underwriter comfortable with accepting that risk of you not. But these are the questions you need to ask, and don't just take it as for granted when they come to you with something. And lastly, really make sure that you're understanding and you have them map out what is the with timelines, right? Not, yep, I'll get your stuff and then I'll be in touch. Like that's not acceptable, right? Here's what I'm going to take this information. Here's when it gets submitted. Here's who sees it. Here's when I'll give you an update. Let's commit to talking on that date and seeing the status update, right? Like one of the biggest headaches that we've heard from attorneys is that, yeah, I applied for something and it's a black box. I have no idea what the heck is going on. I haven't heard anything. Make sure you're asking these questions. And again, like everything else, you can negotiate this whole process. That can be rate, that can be structure, that can be fees. Everything can be negotiated on the lending side as well. And one of the last things that we heard, and this we've heard a ton, and we ask the question and say, no, of course, how does my bank help my firm grow? Maybe they'll give me a loan, but how can they help me? This is something you need to almost shift your mindset for. And I promise you, most of us on the line are probably not thinking in this mindset. Bankers, and I as a banker, I do this. I ask for referrals. I try to serve my clients and say, hey, who do you know that I can help? Who do you know that would benefit from meeting with me? Who do you think I could give good service to? You should be doing the exact same thing. If you have a banker, if you have an advocate, if you have a relationship, identify your ideal client and go to your banker. Flip the script. Say, hey, banker, here's who I want to get in front of. Here's who I work with. Who do you know? Who do you have in your portfolio? Who do you have through your organizations that you're involved with, the events that you sponsor? Banks are Rolodexes. We've got clients on the personal, on the wealth, on the investment, insurance, business. They've got a vast book of business. And banks are all, not just us, every single bank is looking to add value on commoditized offerings. So your banker will be thrilled if he or she can do an introduction and connect you with someone that's value add. That's a win-win for everybody. So make it a priority. Don't be shy, but identify that client, be strategic, and ask point blank. Ask your banker if you can get in front of folks that meet your criteria.
So Gavin, first of all, I love this. I think this is really great advice. I'm also wondering if you could even scale it a little further because, sometimes, especially with, ethics rules, you're not going to get like a list of some, people to reach out to as the attorney, it needs to really be inbound, them expressing interest, in contacting you. Mm-hmm. Maybe if it requires a little bit of education, if you do estate planning, probate, trust work, et cetera, as an attorney, maybe you do real estate, maybe you do small business, trademarks, IP, things like that. I can think of so many things that bankers are aware of around business formation and a lot of overlap with attorneys. What if you actually said, look, it's been really great working with you. By the way, I help with, high net worth individuals estate planning. I do IP or trademarks. I'd be happy to put on a seminar, right? Similar to maybe even this, would that be something that you think you have clients that would be interested in joining for free? Then you have an opportunity to have a platform, demonstrate your expertise, build your network in your community, and allow for that inbound interest to flow through to you. Plus, you could even do that as a presentation for all the bankers in that group or branch particularly, and they know what you do so they can provide better referrals to you. Just because, oftentimes you'll say, yeah, here's my card, and then they don't really know who you want as a client. They don't really know what you do because I think everyone here knows and has heard me say it probably before, law firm clients come in sort of not predisposed to understand what lawyers and law firms do. So the more that you can teach the banker and their clients in these formats, the more you get out of what Gavin is recommending.
1000%. And anything you can do. Yeah, I love the example. Giving a business card, I can tell you that's not going to work. No banker is going to take that business card, then clear their calendars, sit and say, how can I get Maddy in front of people?
Right.
It doesn't happen.
You have to create the opportunity.
Doing stuff, create the opportunity, make it a priority. This is on you. This is on you as the attorney to try to say, how can I leverage my bank to get more? And maybe it's not like, even if you don't want, like I'm busy, I don't have time for that. It can be as simple as asking, what are the events that you're going to coming up? I'd love to attend. I'd love to join as your guest. And then all of a sudden you can meet and greet and ask for introductions. It doesn't have to be a formal business development plan, but I promise you, and COVID's a little bit of a crazy time because for obvious reasons, but I promise you bankers are going to mixers, networking events, seminars,
sponsoring bar association, dinners. Even in Buffalo here, I see it all the time, so they are probably at or sponsoring the events or want to be involved in things that you're attending to.
Exactly. So make it a priority. Most people don't think this is even an option for their bank. They think of it as, hey, deposits, loans, if I need anything, I'll call. But shift your mindset. Really think about how you can get more and work with your community banker to see what you can do there, because I can tell you those relationships just become more and more sticky on both sides. And if your banker is referring you business, you'll obviously start referring to them, and it's better for everybody. So make sure you're focused on yourself and how you can make your bank work for you with this regard. So in closing, I want to leave a couple minutes for Q&A. Would love to hear from some of the folks online. But if you take nothing else away, right? If this was just Gavin as a talking head and Maddy jumping in with some good questions, there's two things you need to take away from this, even if you're a solo attorney. You are important. Banks love you, so have a voice, and everything is negotiable. Truly everything. So don't take stuff for granted and assume that you can negotiate across the board. And one thing, just as a little plug here, is that who I am and why I'm even talking. We're trying to get there, right? So I'm with Nota, I'm with M&T Bank. We're not at the DMV level, but I can tell you, I'm not going to put lipstick on a pig. We're not Apple yet, right? We got some work to do. What we are doing is we're building a digital bank for lawyers. So we put Nota together. We've grown in the last 12 months from 10 users to almost 500 users. And we're building a digital bank specifically for the little guy, for the solos, the small firms. And what we started with, instead of saying, let's build a perfect mousetrap, 50 bells and whistles, let's see what happens. No, we're working with attorneys saying, let's start with the IOLTA. Your IOLTA is a headache, you can get in a lot of trouble. How can we help you? And every single feature and functionality that we built was not built by Gavin or an engineer, but it was sitting face to face, sitting with attorneys and saying, what do you want? How can we do it? And what we've built is a tool that is integrated with your bank account, helps you account for every penny in real time, keep your IOLTA continuously reconciled, and run reports, not with a 3-hour reconciliation session at the end of the month, but with the click of a button. So offline, I'd love to connect with anybody, even just as a conversation. But if you do want to learn more, our website is in the top right here. It's www.trustnota.com. But that's all I have. I appreciate the time. Would love to maybe open it up for questions and kind of hear from folks on the line.
Yeah, Gavin, thank you so much. I think that we addressed a lot of the questions actually that have already come through. But when someone is sort of like debating, how hard is it going to be for me to actually move my bank from what they're using right now to Nota? I think that's a question that's come up before when you and I have presented together or talked. Maybe that's something we can also address, and also that you're rolling out nationwide, I think is really relevant to this audience.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the latter point on nationwide. So nothing is definitive yet. So just as I kind of touched on in the overview, right now Nota is available in the Northeast states, right? New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, DC, Maryland, Virginia, Florida, Delaware, and West Virginia.
Nicely done.
Nicely done. We have had conversations with attorneys all over the country, and one of the things that we're pursuing, TBD, is how we can expand or strategically partner to offer this type of service across the country. Now, what I can say, this is being recorded, so I will say this. That's not Gavin, the compliance person or the M&T legal division. There's legwork that has to be done. But we are having those preliminary conversations because what we found, this is not an East Coast problem. This is a universal problem with solo and small firm attorneys. So we're trying to see how we can learn from attorneys all over the country and strategically pursue where it might make sense to expand.
Right.
Now, regarding your first question, Maddy, on switching banks, it can be a pain. I'm not going to say it's all sunshine and rainbows. We try to advise people that there's smart ways to do it. With your IOLTA, I will never recommend anybody shut it down over here, open it up over there overnight. Because God forbid you have a check that's in transit you forgot about, and then it hits and it bounces, you're getting audited. So there's a couple different things we can do. And the big questions we always ask is, if you understand your client balances and you feel confident down to the penny, it's as easy as writing yourself a check and moving funds to a new institution. What a lot of firms elect to do, instead of doing that, just for peace of mind, I'm going to keep it at bank A. I want to move to bank B. I'll start with a line in the sand. So starting March 1st, 2021, I'm going to use bank B. I'm going to let bank A wind down, and then I don't have to worry about mixing and matching or getting into issues. And the nice thing about Nota, we don't require operating accounts to move over. So it can just be the IOLTA. You can start fresh with zeros, and that's fine. But I would talk with, and again, this is a Nota specific example. I would talk with whatever bank you're looking to move for, and figure out what that process looks like and how they can streamline it for you, because it can be a pain if it's not handled correctly.
Okay, and to be expected, there is a question about LawPay. So how do you integrate with LawPay?
Yeah, so we do integrate with LawPay. So we allow attorneys, obviously, if you're accepting credit cards, we heard from attorneys, LawPay is the gold standard. M&T Bank, interestingly, we do not offer LawPay, right? There's agreements in place. We know it's a value add for attorneys. So we built out an integration, even though it's directly competing with kind of what we offer as just standard credit card processing. But we do have LawPay integration. If you want to learn more, we'd be happy to connect for a 15-minute demo, and I can show you. And you can also sign up for a demo on our website. But what it does is it allows attorneys that accept funds via credit card it helps funnel those into the correct client matters at a high level within the IOLTA account.
Okay, and are you saying, Gavin, that also if you have Nota, there is an online payment portal for links to directly put funds either by credit card or debit ACH into your accounts through Zelle or something like that?
Not at the. I'm loving it. So we at the moment today, no. What I can tell you is that we have heard from attorneys, and again, this is my mousetrap analogy. We want to make sure that we're building stuff where there's the need. And we've heard from attorneys like, hey, receiving funds can be a headache. How can we streamline that and build out a process there? So our engineers are actually interviewing our users. We're doing recording calls like this to see what their process is, how they want to streamline it, and how we can tie that in. But at the moment, I can say there's no formal integration there. What would happen is any funds that are received would show up in Nota, and you can easily tag and track it by client matter. But I can tell you we are building that. And if that's something that interests you and you have opinions on what that would look like, would love to connect offline and see how we can maybe get something for you that would help with that.
Okay, great. And if you're using something like Clio that has LawPay integrated, you could set it at the matter level, or you could set it within LawPay to say, this is how I want my payments to be directed to those funds.
Yeah, 1,000%. So I'm not going to get in the weeds. What I can say is that over 50%, I think, don't quote me, I think almost 60% of our users are using a practice management software. So this is not practice management software. Think of this as a bank account. Every attorney needs a bank account. The goal for this is to be a smarter bank account. We are building out integrations with practice management software. We've already built out an integration with QuickBooks Online and with LawPay. But please do not think of this as a change in your process and a complete revamp. This is just a way to think about getting a few more features from your bank account that really aren't being offered.
Right. So LawPay, you know, it's going to go into the right accounts, and that's really the most important integration. Wonderful. Well, Gavin, thank you so much. I have one last question. I'll read this off. Is there a timeline for how long an attorney can hold client funds in IOLTA on a matter? Essentially, should an attorney cut small checks to clients until fully paid out, or is it best to pay all funds on full settlement?
Ooh,
that might be a
curveball like that at 358. That is a bar association question. I do know there's requirements that you can't sit on client funds for a long period of time. So if you're sitting on client funds for whatever that period is, you need to make sure that you're complying with the bar. But I am not an attorney. I'm a banker. I do not feel comfortable kind of giving guidance there, but I would definitely talk to your bar.
Yeah, I would get in touch for the person who asked that, or anyone else who has that question. Get in touch with your bar association, and there are ethics advisors, law practice management advisors, really great groups there. They'll route you to the appropriate person who can help you with that question. All right, wonderful. Well, we're just about up. Gavin, thank you so much. So to get in touch with you, to explore Nota further, trustnota.com, and then to get in touch with you, Gavin at trustnota.com. Is that right?
Yep, I'll put in the chat right here. So Gavin at trustnota.com. And even if you're not in those states that we mentioned and you just want to have a conversation and kind of see what we're building and how it might help, I'm always looking to connect and have conversations and continue to learn. So thank you for the time. And Maddy, I'm really good. Yep, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, first of all, yes, thank you for your time, Gavin. Like, I didn't do anything here, but thank you for being here and for sharing really meaningful advice. I think that, a lot of these conversations, just you hear a product demo or something and you delivered so much more value. And I really appreciate that, speaking on behalf of everyone. The other thing is, I'll say, get in touch with Gavin. Just have a quick call, or, send him your information that you live in a different state outside of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, and you are interested in this, so you can be notified when they expand. So we don't, for any company that's not yet in your area, I recommend that, but, obviously they're keeping track of where the greatest demand is, as, part of their rollout. So, don't be shy. Anyway, Gavin, thank you again. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. And I will include Gavin's contact information in the show notes and the email that I send if you registered live for this webinar. So take care and see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.